My head was pounding. It was a deep, thrumming ache that pulsed behind my eyes, the kind you get from too much bad champagne and not enough good decisions. The pillow beneath my cheek was rough, not my usual 1,000 thread count Egyptian cotton, and it smelled faintly of stale beer and something else, something acrid. I pried my eyes open, the world swimming into focus. The ceiling was a landscape of cracked, water-stained plaster. This wasn't my apartment. This wasn't my life. For a moment, I was paralyzed by a wave of disorientation, so profound it felt like vertigo. Then the memories root crashing over me, not in a gentle trickle, but a tidal wave. The hushed, guilty voices from my mother and sister in the living room. The crisp, impersonal letter from the firm stating that as my sister, Anna, was the named successor to my position at Foster & Sterling, my services would no longer be required. The look on my boyfriend Mark's face, a mask of pity that didn't quite hide his relief, as he'd packed my things into cheap, black beige bags. But the sharpest, most agonizing memory was the phone call. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, her voice trembling and laced with TRS. "It's your mother, sweetie," she'd said. "The ambulance is here. It looks bad." And they hadn't called me. My entire family, the people I'd sacrificed my 20s for, the people I'd paid off debts for, the people whose dreams I'd made my own, hadn't bothered to call. They were probably too busy finalizing the details of how they'd spend the money that was rightfully mine. The $10 million RS. That's what it was. All this pain distilled into one clean, infuriating number. Then I'd taken the call from the hospital, my hand shaking so hard I could hold the phone to my AR. The doctor's clipped, professional tone. "I'm sorry, Miss Sinclair. Your mother, Helen, didn't make it. And now I was here. In a dump of an apartment, not the sleek high-rise condo I'd paid for in Midtown. On my desk a dusty, cheap laptop hummed. It was the only source of light in the otherwise dark room, casting a sickly blue glow. The date on the screen's lower right corner read June 12, 2020. It was May 14, 2026. I blinked then blinked again. The numbers didn't change. A tremor of something not quite fear, more like furious, desperate hope, root in my chest. I scrambled out of the lumpy bed, my bare feet hitting a cold, gritty linoleum floor. I stumbled to the tiny, grimy bathroom and flicked on the light. The fluorescent bulb buzzed and flickered to life, illuminating a face I hadn't seen in years. A younger face. My face, but without the fine lines of worry and exhaustion. My hair a richer, natural auburn, not the faded, overprocessed color I'd been maintaining. It was me, but it was me from a decade ago. I looked exactly like I had when I was 22, the year I'd scraped together enough money to move to the city. A choked laugh, a sound caught between a sob and a scream tore from my throat. It was a sick joke. It had to be. I'd been running on fumes for so long, drowning my sorrow in cheap boxed wine. This had to be some bizarre, alcohol-induced fantasy. But the cold floor beneath my feet was real. The stale smell of the apartment was real. The ache in my joints from sleeping on a thin, lumpy mattress was excruciatingly real. I walked back to the desk, my movements slow, mechanical. The computer screen was a portal to a past life. My inbox was a disaster of student loans, maxed-out credit card statements, and desperate emails from job applications I'd sent out months ago. And there, at the top, a single unread email from a domain I knew intimately. Foster & Sterling. My heart hammered against my ribs. I clicked it open with a trembling finger. "DEA are Ms. Sinclair. We are pleased to inform you that your application for the position of junior accountant has been successful. We were particularly impressed by your interview. Your STA routing date will be Monday, June 22, 2020. Please report to Human Resources at 9 a.m. for your orientation." It was the offer letter. The offer I had been over the moon to receive the first time around. The job I'd poured my entire soul into for years, thinking it was my salvation. The job I'd used to buy my parents a new car and pay off my sister's exorbitant ART school loans. The job I'd ultimately been unceremoniously fired from, leaving me with nothing. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening certainty. This was real. I wasn't dreaming. I had been sent back. Not to a glorious moment of triumph, but to a STA rooting point. A point of absolute, grinding poverty and desperation. A point just before I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Believing that my family's love was something I could buy with a fat paycheck, that I slammed the laptop shut, a raw, cold fury settling into my bones. They had taken everything. My career, my savings, my dignity, my future. They had smiled and taken while I'd worked myself into an EARLY grave. And in the end, they hadn't even bothered to call. The memory of that silence was like ice water in my veins. They wanted the money, the 10 million I'd sacrificed everything for. They could burn in hell before they saw a single dime of it this time. That wasn't family money. That wasn't inheritance. That was my blood, sweat, and TRS. Renette on the back of 116-hour workdays and sleepless nights. It had always been mine. A plan, sharp and brutal as a knife, began to form in my mind. Last time, I was the grateful, dutiful daughter, eager to please. This time, I was a ghost who had seen the aftermath. I knew the exact trajectory. I knew who would betray me and when. I knew every opportunity, every investment, every deal that would lead to that fateful bonus. And I knew, with absolute clarity, that my family was not going to be a part of it. My phone, a clunky ancient model from a time before iPhones dominated the world, buzzed on the desk. A text message from my mom flashed across the screen. Luna honey, how is the APA recruitment hunting going? Did you get that job offer? Let's have dinner tonight, my treat. I'm so excited for you. The message was cheerful, full of love, the picture-perfect image of a supportive mother. And I knew the reality behind it. The treat would be a cheap fast food meal I'd pay for anyway. The excitement was a performance to keep me compliant. The APA recruitment hunt was a joke. I'd be pressured into giving the money I needed for a deposit to my sister, Anna, who needed it for a new portfolio. I read at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a second, the ghost of the old Luna, the good daughter, the people pleaser, almost took over. But then I thought of the silence. The doctor's voice, indifferent and professional, telling me my mother was gone. It was all the incentive I needed. I typed a single curt reply. Got the job. Busy tonight. Rain check. I threw the phone onto the bed. The old Luna would have crafted a long, detailed, apologetic message. The new Luna didn't have time for that. I had $1 million contract to sign, a career to reboot, and a family to cut out of my life like a tumor. I turned back to the laptop and opened a new browser window, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I knew the market was about to make a bizarre temporary dip. A fluke caused by a now infamous tweet from a tech CEO that sent his company's stock plummeting. In my old life, I'd ignored it, too busy trying to meet a deadline at work. This time I saw it as a gift. I had a few $1,000s in a savings account. Money I'd made for a security deposit on an APA recruitment that wasn't worth it. This was my up capital. Hours later, I was down to my last few $Rs. But my newly created brokerage account looked vastly different. I'd timed the dip perfectly. It wasn't a fortune, not yet, but it was the first seed of my independence. It was the start of the war. The sky outside my grimy window was beginning to lighten with the gray-pink hue of a city dawn. I sat back in the creaking desk chair, my entire body thrumming with a nervous electric energy. This wasn't about the money itself. At least not entirely. It was about the power. It was about the choice. My phone buzzed again. A group chat, this time. Anna, my sister. A photo of a painting she'd just finished. Do you guys love it? I might need a little help with the framing. It's a bit pricey. Can't wait to see it in my new gallery. She wrote that my eyes narrowed. The new gallery. The one her bohemian lifestyle couldn't afford. The one that was on the verge of falling through in my old life, until I'd bailed it out. A loan she'd never repaid. It was like watching a movie I'd already seen, knowing the twist ending. My mom replied instantly. It's stunning, sweetheart. Luna, you should see her talent. Isn't she just amazing? Maybe we can all chip in for the framing. The request was naked. Chip in was code for Luna will pay. I typed a reply, my thumb pressing the buttons with a final click. Looks great, Anna. Good luck. That was it. No promises. No offers of financial support. I pocketed the phone, ignoring the immediate buzz of a follow-up message, probably from my mom, criticizing my lack of enthusiasm. I needed a weapon, the best one I could get. In my old life, I'd met the CEO of a small, struggling tech startup at a corporate mixer. I'd been too busy networking for my current job to pay him much attention, but I remembered the name. Nexus Dynamics. Everyone had written them off, but I remembered a news headline from a year later. Asterisk Nexus Dynamics, the little engine that could, acquired in a $300 million deal. Asterisk the CEO, a man named Julian Thorne, was a genius who was terrible at self-promotion. He needed funding and he had no idea how to get it. I knew exactly what to say to him. I had a few $1,000s left and I was going to bet it all on him. In my previous life, I'd worked for a firm that managed his rival's portfolio. I had the intel. I knew the deal that was going to fall through, the one that would make him look like a failure in the short term, only to make him a billionaire in the long. It was a calculated risk, but then again I was a ghost. I had nothing to lose. I dialed the number on my phone. It was the middle of the night, but I knew he'd be awake. I knew the insomnia of a desperate entrepreneur. Hello, his voice was gruff. Annoyed at Mr. Thorne. I said, my voice smooth and assured, a stark contrast to the trembling woman who'd woken up in this dump a few hours ago. My name is Luna Sinclair. I know it's late, but I have a proposition for you. One that I believe could save your company from its current predicament. There was a long silence. Then a wee suspicious sigh. You have 30 seconds. I smiled. It was a cold, calculated smile that didn't reach my eyes. That's all the time I'll need. I laid out my terms, a simple infusion of capital and a strategic partnership. He was listening. I could tell by the change in his breathing. By the end, he was skeptical but intrigued. And what do you want in return, Miss Sinclair? A seat at the table, Mr. Thorne. A piece of the future. I knew he needed this deal more than he knew. The desperation was a tangible thing in his voice. I gave him a number that was insultingly low for what I was offering, but I knew he couldn't refuse. He fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. The final piece of my plan had clicked into place. I was no longer the defeated Luna, the one who'd died in a rundown apartment, ignored by the people she'd loved. I was a ghost, a shadow of the past, with a single, burning mission to win. The sun was now fully up, illuminating the grime and decay of my current life. But I didn't see the mess. I saw a battlefield. And my victory had already begun. The first thing I did was open my banking app. With a few clicks, I transferred every single penny I had into a new account. A brand new account at a completely different bank. An account my family knew nothing about. I'd used a different address for it, a P.O. box across town. I called it the Phantom Fund. Then I called a realtor. A Sharp, high-powered one I'd used in my old life to find my mother a new house. Now I was using her to find me one. A small secure apartment in a good neighborhood. Not too flashy but safe. Somewhere I could lay low and start building my empire. I need a place by the end of the week, I said, my voice clipped and professional. I don't see a re about the view. I see a re about security and anonymity. Of course, Miss Sinclair, the realtor purred. I have a few places that might suit you. As I hung up, the calm before the storm settled over me. My family, my old life, the $10 million they thought they'd get their hands on eventually. It was all in my rearview mirror. I took a last look around the apartment. The tiny kitchen with its single flickering fluorescent light, the sagging couch, the overwhelming smell of despair. It was a place that had held the ghost of my past. But I was leaving it behind. In every sense of the word. My phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I let it ring. Then again. And again. After the fourth call, I silenced the phone. She could wait. They all could wait. They had no idea what was coming for them, and I was going to enjoy every second of their confusion. The game had officially begun. The new apartment was a sanctuary of clean lines and quiet privilege. It wasn't an ostentatious penthouse. I didn't want to draw attention. It was a minimalistic one-bedroom in a converted Wari house in a trendy, but not flashy, part of Brooklyn. The building had a concierge who didn't ask questions and a secure, underground parking garage. It was perfect. The furniture was spa RSE, a high-end Italian couch, a ridiculously comfortable bed, and a desk that I'd filled with all the latest tech. It was a fortress of solitude, a place to plot my revenge. 2 weeks had passed since my rebirth. My life had been a frantic, exhilarating whirlwind of activity. I'd officially STA root at Foster and Sterling, the same company that would eventually discard me. But this time, I wasn't a desperate STARRY-eyed kid. I was an observer. I knew the corporate politics, the hidden alliances, the looming disasters. I kept my head down, my eyes open, and my mouth shut. I was building a reputation as a reliable, if unremarkable, junior accountant. It was the perfect disguise. The real work was happening in the shadows. My investment in Nexus Dynamics was already showing promise. Julian Thorne, true to form, was a visionary, and the company was quietly developing a groundbreaking new software platform. I'd become his silent partner, his secret weapon. I wasn't just giving him money, I was giving him a roadmap. I'd whisper suggestions in his EAR, point him to RD overlooked talent, and steer him away from the pitfalls I'd seen other RT-ups fall into. I was playing a long game, and I was playing it perfectly. The silence from my family was a delicious, heavy cloak. I had ignored their calls and texts for 2 weeks, except for the occasional, non-committal emoji or a brief, impersonal reply to a direct question. I was becoming a ghost in their lives, just as they'd been in mine. The lack of attention was STA rooting to get to them. My mother had STA root leaving increasingly frantic voicemails, her cheerful tone cracking with a note of concern, which I knew was less about me and more about her fear or that I might be slipping from her control. Luna, honey, we haven't seen you in ages. We're so worried. Call me. We have so much to talk about. She was always we, when it came to money. We, the family, were a united front to extract whatever they could from me. Anna's texts were different. They were filled with a smug, superior tone, designed to make me feel guilty for not being there to worship her every move. You're missing my gallery opening. Mom is so sad you're not here. It's a huge deal, you know. I didn't even dignify that with a response. Her opening was a last-minute scramble, and I knew it was going to be a flop. In my past life, I'd been the one to call in favors and pay for the catering to make it a success. This time, I simply watched from afar, through Anna's own Instagram stories, a beautiful, empty room filled with a few people who were probably just there for the free wine. It was a small, sweet victory. Mark, my ex-boyfriend, was the most predictable. His texts were an awkward RD mixture of concern, and a not-so-subtle attempt to keep his foot in the door. Hey, I haven't heard from you. Everything okay? Let's grab a drink soon, just like old times. The old times he missed were me paying for every dinner, every movie, every single thing we'd ever done. He was a leech who, in my previous life, had spent the weeks leading up to my firing ghosting me, only to show up at my APA meant with a suitcase and a promise to help me through this tough time. He'd helped himself to what was left of my savings, and then DeSape read the second a more profitable opportunity Ape read. I'd been his cash cow, and he was STA rooting to miss the milk. I was a ghost, and it was the most powerful I'd ever felt. I was erasing myself from their narrative, and they didn't know how to function without me. They were like children who had lost their favorite toy. The phone call that changed everything came on a Thursday evening. I was in the middle of a detailed financial model, mapping out the exact trajectory of the tech sector for the next year. The number on my screen was my mother's. I let it go to voicemail, as usual. The red notification light blinked, and I ignored it for an hour. But my gut was churning. Something was different this time. I could feel it. I finally listened to the message. Luna, it's your mom. Listen, honey, your father is. He's going to the hospital. It's his HERT again. Please call me as soon as you get this. Her voice was strained, and for the first time, it sounded genuinely SCA red. Not just annoyed or manipulative. My first instinct was a cold, hardening feeling in my chest. It was a tactic. It had to be. They knew I was distancing myself, and they were pulling out the big guns. In my past life, this had been a devastatingly effective technique. A health SCA would always bring me running back, my guilt overriding my logic. I would swoop in, pay for the best doctors, rearrange my life, and they would use the illness as a shield, a way to keep me trapped in their web of need. But then I remembered the phone call from the hospital from my old life. Mrs. Gable's voice, my mother's death. They hadn't called me then. They'd cut me out completely. The irony of the situation hit me like a sledgehammer. Here I was, having been erased from their lives, and now they were trying to drag me back in. Using the same playbook that a bitter, angry laugh escaped my lips. His heart again. I muttered to the empty room. It was the same play, but this time, I knew the script. I remembered the doctor's report from my previous life. It wasn't his heart. It was a minor panic attack brought on by stress over money. Money he'd lost gambling. Money he thought I'd replenish. I was almost certain it was a lied up but a tiny treacherous part of my brain. The part that still remembered the ghost of a little girl who just wanted to be loved, whispered. What if it's not? I couldn't let that possibility, however remote, go unchecked. Not because I read about my father, the man who had abandoned me to a life of servitude to his dreams, but because the absolute, unassailable high ground required that I show up. I needed to prove to myself, and to the universe, that I was no longer the wounded, desperate animal they'd raised. I was a cold, calculating strategist. And a strategist needed to see the battle for themselves. I called my mother back. She answered on the first ring. Luna. She sounded relieved. The relief of a drowning woman who'd spotted a passing ship. Thank God. Where have you been? I was so worried. Mom. I'm fine. Busy with work. My voice was flat, devoid of emotion. What hospital is Dad at? St. Mary's. He's in the cardiac unit. The doctor's rerunning tests. It's been so stressful, honey. We need you. We need you. There it was. The reason for the call. A need for help, not a want for a daughter. I'll be there in an hour. I was methodical. I knew St. Mary's. In my old life, I'd spent countless hours there, holding my mother's hand while she complained about the nurses, paying her bills, and crying in the chapel. I knew the layout, the best vending machines, and the gossipy night shift supervisor, a woman named Nurse Maria, who hated my father for the way he'd spoken to her. That I changed out of my casual clothes and into a power suit. It was important to look the part. I didn't want to look frazzled or sympathetic. I wanted to look like a banker, a figure of authority, someone who wasn't going to be an easy RK. I grabbed my sleek leather briefcase and headed for the CAR. The hospital was a labyrinth of sterile, fluorescent-lit hallways and the smell of antiseptic. It was the scent of sadness and anxiety. I navigated my way to the cardiac unit, my heels clicking a Shaw RP, determined rhythm on the linoleum floor. That my mother was in the waiting room, her face etched with a perfect simulation of worry. She was wearing one of her nicer dresses and her makeup was flawless. It was a performance. Anna was beside her, her expression a mixture of boredom and irritation. She was scrolling through her phone, probably looking for a way to make this all about her. They both looked up as I approached. My mother's face broke into a relieved smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Luna. There you are. She rushed forward to envelop me in a hug that felt more like a performance of affection. That I allowed myself to be hugged. Not because I wanted it, but because I wanted to see the confusion in her eyes when I didn't melt into it. How is he? I asked. My voice clipped up. Still waiting for the doctor, she said, fanning herself with her hand. It's been hours. I'm just so worried. He was so pale, Luna. It was terrifying. I didn't comment. I just turned to Anna. Anna, good to see you. My voice was flat, as if I were greeting a business acquaintance. She gave me a tight, robotic smile. Luna, she said, her eyes flickering over my outfit with a mix of surprise and resentment. Nice suit. Did you get a promotion already? Just a new project, I said, dismissing her. Where's Dad? Room 204, my mother said, gesturing down the hall. He's asking for you. Of course he was. The sicker the patient, the bigger the guilt trip. I walked down the hall, the sound of my own footsteps the only thing I focused on. My mind was a war zone. The cold, calculating part of me told me to walk in, see the lie and leave. But the ghost of the little girl, the one who'd spent her whole life trying to earn their love, was fighting for a foothold. I pushed open the door to room 204. The room was dimly lit. My father, a man who had always seemed larger than life in his demands and disappointments, looked small and frail in the hospital bed. His face was pale, and there were wires attached to his chest. A HRT monitor beeped rhythmically that he opened his eyes as I entered. "Luna," he whispered, his voice weak. "You came." I walked to the side of the bed, but I didn't sit down. I didn't reach for his hand. "Of course, Dad. How are you feeling?" He made a show of taking a shallow breath. "Better, now that you're here. I was so worried. I thought I was going to, you know." He trailed off dramatically. "It was a panic attack, wasn't it?" His eyes widened. For a split second, the mask slipped. "What? No, the doctor said it was my HRT. I spoke to Nurse Maria on the way in." I lied smoothly. I hadn't, but I knew she was on duty. She said it was a panic attack, brought on by stress. Stress from gambling debts. Perhaps. The room went very, very quiet. The HRT monitor continued its steady beep, but it seemed to be the only sound in the world. My father's face went from pale to a blotchy red. The mask of the invalid was gone, replaced by the face of a guilty, cornered man. "I don't know what you're talking about," he sputtered, the weakness in his voice replaced by a thin, reedy angered. "Don't you?" I said, my voice icy calm. "The debts you ran up at the Atlantic City Casino last month, the ones you'd hoped a certain one of your daughters would be able to help you pay off." My mother read in the doorway, her face a mask of horror. Anna was behind her, her mouth agape. "The performance was over. How do you speak to your father like that?" My mother shrieked, her composure shattering. "He's a sick man. He needs our support." "He doesn't need our support, Mom," I said, turning to her. "He needs a treatment plan for his gambling addiction. And he needs to stop using imaginary HRT attacks to manipulate me into paying for it." The words hung in the air. My father looked utterly defeated. My mother looked as if she had been slapped. Anna just read, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. That I took a breath, the anger a cold, steady flame in my chest. It felt good. It felt like finally pulling a thorn out of my foot. "I'm not going to do it," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm not going to pay off your debts. I'm not going to be your emergency fund. I'm done. You can figure out how to manage your own affairs." I looked at my mother, then at Anna. "And the two of you can stop pretending you have a child and a sister. You had one once. But you killed her. You just didn't realize it until now." I turned and walked out of the room, my heels echoing in the sudden, stunned silence. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I'd done it. I'd called them out on their most pathetic manipulation. The victory felt hollow, but it was a victory nonetheless. That I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes on my back, burning with a mixture of shock, fury, and a growing sense of dread. They had no idea what I was becoming. Back in my car, I sat in the parking lot for a long moment, staring at the sterile facade of the hospital. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A photo of a man, Julian Thorne, shaking hands with a well-known tech mogul. The caption: Nexus Dynamics and Titan Software announced strategic partnership. The future has a new leader. The acquisition was in motion. It was happening even faster than I'd anticipated. My investment was about to multiply, turning my small stake into an empire. I read at the image, a slow smile spreading across my face. This was the beginning of the end. The money was just a tool. The real prize was the power, the freedom, and the sweet, sweet victory of leaving them all in the dust. I root the engine. I had a lot of work to do. A new account to manage. An empire to build. And a family to leave behind. 6 months. It felt like a lifetime and a heartbeat all at once. The ghost of the woman who had woken up in that grimy apartment was a distant memory. A fading photograph in the back of my mind. In her place stood Luna Sinclair, the silent partner of Nexus Dynamics, the company that had become the darling of the tech world. The strategic partnership I'd brokered had been a masterstroke, catapulting the START up into a multi-billion-dollar valuation. My initial investment, a pittance I'd rely scraped together, had grown into something astronomical. I wasn't just wealthy, I was becoming a force of nature. I had a sleek new office in a high-rise in Manhattan, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a city I was now finally rooting to own. I had a team of lawyers, financial advisors, and a personal assistant who was more loyal than any family member I'd ever had. My life was a whirlwind of BOA RD meetings, investment deals, and a carefully curated silence Riga writing my personal life. The new account, the one they knew nothing about, was no longer just a stash of cash. It was a fortress, a vault of power. My family had been relegated to the position of a persistent, irritating buzz in the background. After my dramatic exit from the hospital, they'd tried everything. My mother had left tearful voicemails, my father had tried to call from a blocked number, and Anna had sent a series of increasingly desperate and unhinged emails. The texts had sta root out as pleading, then became accusatory, then veered into a strange, syrupy sweetness that was somehow more nauseating than the anger. Their attempts to manipulate me had become a sad, predictable cycle. But they didn't know the extent of my success. I had become very, very good at hiding. My name was never in the press. I wasn't on the social pages. To the outside world, I was just another anonymous financial consultant. They had no idea that I was the one quietly pulling the strings of one of the most successful companies in the world, that the final act of my estrangement was a visit to the lawyer who had finalized my firing from Foster and Sterling in my previous life. I hadn't remembered his name, but a simple CRCH of the company's database had unarrayed him. A man named Arthur Finch. He was a Shah RK, a corporate lawyer who specialized in making problems disap AR. And I had a problem that needed to disap AR. Miss Sinclair, he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair, his eyes Shah RP and assessing. Your situation is unique. You wish to be legally red, unaffiliated with your family. Not unaffiliated, I'd corrected, my voice even. I want to be protected from them. They have a history of financial abuse. They have been using me as a personal ATM for YRS. I want a legal BA Ryer. A complete severance. He'd studied the documents I'd provided, the records of the loans I'd taken out for them, the credit cards I'd co-signed, the property I'd purchased in my name but with them living in it. I'd also provided a list of their debts, the amount of money they owed, and the various ways they'd attempted to fleece me. This is quite a collection of evidence, he'd said, his tone admiring. Restraining orders, financial separation agreements. You're building quite the case. What's your end game? I don't want them to have anything, I'd said, my voice a cold, flat line. Not a dollar, not a shari of my success, not a whisper of my name. I want to vanish from their lives as effectively as they vanished from mine. He'd nodded, a predatory smile on his face. I can work with that. And now the legal wheels were in motion. A restraining order was in place, forbidding them from contacting me. A separate, ironclad document had been filed, severing me from any financial obligation to them and claiming sole ownership of everything I'd ever rented, including the house I'd bought for them in my name. They would have to legally vacate. It was a scorched-earth policy, a complete and total disentanglement. The final domino to fall was a confrontation. Not a physical one, I didn't want to give them the satisfaction, but a legal, documented one. I'd arranged for the process server to deliver the stack of legal documents to my parents' house at a time I knew they would all be there. I'd asked my assistant to send them a text from my phone, a simple final message. Check your mail. The message was a taunt, a confirmation that I wasn't just a ghost anymore. I was a ghost that was actively haunting them. I watched the entire scene unfold from the safety of my office, thanks to a security camera I'd had installed on the street outside their house months ago. It was a small, unassuming thing, a part of a neighborhood watch program I'd never signed up for. But it was my window into the chaos I was creating. The process server, a man in a plain suit who looked like he could be a FedEx driver, approached the house. My mother answered the door, her face a mask of confusion. He handed her the thick manila envelope. I saw her take it, her brow furrowed. She signed for it and the man left. She stood on the porch for a moment, looking at the envelope, before she turned and went back inside. I leaned forward in my chair, my heart pounding with a cold, unnatural excitement. It was the anticipation of a cat who knew the mouse was in the trap. 5 minutes later, the chaos began. The front door of the house swung open, and my father came reeling out, his face a blotchy shade of purple. He was waving his ARMS, shouting something unintelligible at the empty street. My mother was behind him, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with panic. Anna Ape read a moment later, her face pale and twisted in fury. They looked like a bunch of actors in a bad play. Their emotions theatrical and overblown. My mother root crying, a loud, wailing sound that was probably audible to the neighbors. My father was pacing, his fists clenched, his face a mask of impotent rage. Anna was screaming at her phone, probably leaving me another voicemail. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. They were reading the documents, the legal death knell of their parasitic relationship with me, the eviction notice, the termination of financial support, the restraining order. It was all there, black and white, a final unassailable statement of my independence. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was my mother. I knew she was the one screaming on the other end. I let it ring. I watched the screen as the call went to voicemail. Then the phone buzzed again. Anna. Then my father. The calls came in a relentless, frantic rage. I silenced my phone and placed it face down on the desk that I didn't need to listen to their words. I'd been listening to their pleas for most of my life. They were empty. They were meaningless. They were just noise. That I leaned back in my chair, a slow, deep smile spreading across my face. The world was quiet. The sun was setting, painting the Manhattan skyline in hues of orange and pink. It was a beautiful, peaceful view. I felt a profound sense of calm, a feeling I'd never experienced before. It was the silence of a war. But the calm was deceptive. I knew them. They were cornered animals. Desperate. Vicious. This was only the beginning of their attack. A week later, I was in a meeting with Julian, finalizing the details of the Nexus Dynamics expansion into the European market. My phone, which I'd left on my assistant's desk, buzzed insistently. I ignored it. Julian was in the middle of a passionate pitch about a new acquisition, and I was nodding along, my mind already calculating the potential ROI. Then my assistant, Sarah, knocked on the door and poked her head in. Her face was pale. Miss Sinclair, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation. Your mother is here. She's in the lobby. The words hung in the air like a bomb. I felt the blood drain from my face. She's what? She's demanding to see you. She's making a scene. Security is trying to contain her, but she's telling anyone who will listen that you're her daughter, and you've stolen her house and her life savings. Sarah's voice was trembling. That I excused myself from Julian, my mind racing. This was a new low. A public spectacle. It was a direct attack on the life I'd built, the carefully constructed anonymity I'd worked so hard to maintain. I walked to the elevator, my heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm on the marble floor. The lobby of my building was a scene of controlled chaos. My mother was standing in the center, surrounded by a small circle of security guards. She was wearing a cheap floral print dress, her hair a mess, and her face was streaked with TRS and mascara. She looked like a woman on the edge of a breakdown. And she was performing for an audience of curious onlookers, a few of whom were filming on their phones. Luna! She shrieked as I stepped out of the elevator. There she is. There's my daughter. The one who's abandoned her poor, sick father. The one who's taking everything we have. I stopped a few feet away from her, keeping my distance. I could feel the eyes of the lobby on me. The whispers. The judgment. My mother was a master of manipulation, and she knew exactly how to use public shame as a weapon. Mom, I said, my voice low and steady. This is not the place for this. You need to leave. Leave, she laughed, a hysterical, brittle sound. Leave and let you ruin us. You think you can just throw us out on the street? We gave you everything. We sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay us. Everything, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. You sacrificed everything for me. You took everything from me. Every dollar RIEA rened. Every dream I had. You drained me dry, and then you threw me away. You didn't even call me when you thought Mom was dying. You erased me. And now you're standing in my lobby, making a scene, because you're terrified of being erased yourselves. The lobby went silent. The security guards, the desk staff, the onlookers, they were all ring, caught in the middle of this raw, ugly family drama. Mom, I continued, stepping closer. You have two choices. You can walk out of here right now, with a tiny shred of your dignity intact, and I'll make sure you have enough money to start over somewhere far away from here. Or you can keep screaming, and I'll have you arrested for trespassing, and you'll spend the night in a holding cell. It's your choice." My mother's face contorted. The performance flickered, and for a moment, I saw the real person underneath. The desperate, frightened woman who had built her entire life around the lie that she was a good mother. Then the mask was back. "You wouldn't," she hissed. "You wouldn't, Ari. Try me," I said as she read at me, her eyes blazing with hatred. I read back, my face an impassive mask. We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was weighing her options, trying to find a way to win. But there was no winning this. Not anymore. Finally she broke. She turned on her heel and Ma urged out of the lobby, her head held high, her back a rigid line of defiance. The crowd of onlookers paused route to let her through. I watched her go, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. As the doors slid shut behind her, the world seemed to exhale. The whispers died down. The security guards dispersed. I stood in the middle of the lobby, alone, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I had won this battle, but I knew with a cold sinking certainty that the war was far from over. My family had just shown me their hand, and it was uglier and more desperate than I could have ever imagined. The question was, what were they going to do next? The days after my mother's lobby spectacle blurred into a haze of damage control. I had my legal team issue a formal cease and desist, threatening defamation lawsuits if they continued their public harassment. I upgraded my building's security and instructed SA to screen every single call and visitor with extreme prejudice. But the damage was done. The fully constructed wall of anonymity I'd built around myself had cracks in it, and my family was determined to widen them. Julian had been understanding, in his distracted, visionary way. He'd waved off the incident as a minor family squabble and returned to his spreadsheets. But I could see the questions in his eyes. I was his silent partner, the mysterious woman with the uncanny market instincts and the ruthless business acumen. The revelation that I came from a family of petty con artists was an unwelcome wrinkle in my fully curated mystique, that I threw myself into my work, doubling down on every deal, every investment, every strategic move. The money was piling up faster than I could count. My portfolio was a sprawling, diversified empire that would have made the old Luna weep with joy. But the joy was hollow. The anger that had fueled me for so long was rooting to see go well, leaving behind a strange, empty space. And then the final blow came. It was a Friday afternoon. I was in my office reviewing a quarterly report when Ra knocked on the door. Her face was ashen. "Miss Sinclair, there's something you need to see," she said, her voice trembling. She handed me her tablet. On the screen was a video. A cell phone recording, shaky and low quality but unmistakable. It was my mother, standing on a street corner in a part of town I didn't recognize, crying into a microphone. A reporter was standing next to her, a look of predatory sympathy on his face. My mother was telling the world about her evil, ungrateful daughter. How I'd abandoned them, stolen their home, and left them destitute. How I'd used my wealth to buy lawyers to silence them. How I'd broken her heart and destroyed her family. The video had already been viewed over 1 million times. The comments were a cesspool of vitriol and speculation. People were calling for a boycott of my company. They were digging into my past, unearthing old photographs, old connections. My fully constructed anonymity was gone, replaced by a public persona of a cold, heartless villain. I watched the video in silence, my face impassive. I felt a strange, detached sense of horror. Not at the accusations, which were lies, but at the sheer desperation of it. My mother was willing to burn her own daughter at the stake just to get a few scraps of attention, just to feel like she had some power, some control. It was pathetic. And it was dangerously effective. "It's gone viral," Ra whispered. "The comments are It's not good, Miss Sinclair. There are people calling for your resignation. There are investors asking questions." I nodded, setting the tablet down. My hands were perfectly steady. "Get Arthur Finch on the phone," I said, my voice calm. "And get my PR team in here. We need to get ahead of this." For the next 48 hours, my life became a war of information. I hired a crisis management firm, a sleek, ruthless outfit that specialized in PR rehabilitation. They advised me to stay silent, to let the storm pass. They said the story would die down in a few days. But I knew my family. They wouldn't let it die. They'd keep poking and prodding, feeding the beast with more lies, more drama, more manufactured outrage. I watched the numbers. My reputation was taking a hit, but my companies were resilient. Nexus Dynamics, in particular, was too powerful, too successful to be toppled by a tabloid SMER campaign. Still, the damage was real. The investors were nervous. The BOA RD was unsettled. I needed to do something decisive. Arthur Finch had been working on a counter-narrative. He had a team of private investigators digging into my family's past, unearthing their debts, their petty crimes, their history of financial abuse. He was building a dossier that would paint a very different picture. One of a daughter who had been systematically exploited by a greedy, manipulative family. But it would take time to get the information out. And time was something I was running out of. The breaking point came when I received a call from Julian. His voice was strained. Luna, we need to talk. The BOA RD is getting restless. Some of them are re-asking questions about your situation. They want assurances that this isn't going to affect the company. What do you want me to do, Julian? I asked, my voice flat. I can't control my mother. I can't control what she says. I know, he said, sighing. But I need you to come to the headquarters tomorrow. We're having an emergency BOA RD meeting. I need you to be there. To explain yourself. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Explain myself, explain what I haven't done anything wrong. I know that, he said, his voice softening. But they need to see you. They need to hear it from you. This is a company, Luna. It's not just about numbers. It's about trust. And right now, trust is in short supply. I agreed to the meeting, but I knew it was going to be a battle. A battle I couldn't afford to lose. The next morning, I walked into the Nexus Dynamics headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that had become a symbol of my success. The BOA room was packed with men in expensive suits, their faces a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and barely concealed contempt. I took my seat at the head of the table, next to Julian. The room fell silent. I looked around at the faces, the Shah RKS who had made their fortunes by devouring the weak. I could feel their judgment, their hungered, Miss Sinclair. The chairman began, a portly man with a comb-over and a voice like gravel. We've asked you here today to address the recent controversy surrounding your family. We have concerns about the impact this is having on the company's reputation, and by extension, its bottom line. I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table. I understand your concerns, I said, my voice calm and steady. And I'm here to address them. But before I do, I want to ask you all a question. How many of you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, someone you loved? A few of the men shuffled uncomfortably. The chairman's face remained impassive. The woman in that video is my mother. I stood up, my voice rising with intensity. I have built this company from the ground up. I have given you a return on your investment that is almost unprecedented in the tech sector. I have never once put my personal life ahead of my professional responsibilities. And I refuse to let a SMER campaign by a bunch of desperate con artists undo everything I've worked for. I pulled a folder out of my briefcase and slid it across the table. In here, you'll find detailed documentation of my family's history of fraud, embezzlement, and financial abuse. You'll see the police reports, the credit card statements, the loan agreements. You'll see the truth. And you'll see that I am the victim here, not the villain. The room was silent. The men around the table read at the folder as if it were a live grenade. Julian was watching me with an expression of grudging admiration, that I sat back down. I'm not going to apologize for protecting myself. And I'm not going to let my family's lies destroy the company I've worked so hard to build. If that's not good enough for you, then I'll walk. But I think you'll find that a company without me is a company without a future. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. I could see the calculation in their eyes. They were weighing the cost of losing me against the cost of weathering the scandal. It was a no-brainer. The numbers spoke for themselves. The chairman Clea read his throat. We'll review the documents, he said, his voice subdued. And we'll reconvene in a few days. I nodded, standing up. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to make a decision. I walked out of the Boa room, my head held high. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had just won the biggest battle of my life. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. That the aftermath of the Boa RD meeting was a blur of legal filings and PR statements. Arthur Finch worked his magic, leaking the dossier to a few select journalists who were more interested in the truth than in a good headline. The story began to shift. The narrative of the cold, heartless daughter was slowly being replaced by a more nuanced picture. A woman who had been exploited and abused, who had fought back and who had won. My mother's public campaign fizzled out as the evidence against her mounted. The press had a field day with her history of fraud, her husband's gambling debts, the trail of unpaid loans and broken promises. The public opinion pendulum swung in my favor. The final confrontation with my mother wasn't a dramatic courtroom showdown or a tearful reconciliation. It was a cold, quiet meeting in my lawyer's office, with Arthur Finch presiding like an executioner. My mother looked old and tired. The fight had gone out of her. The anger was still there, a bitter ember in her eyes, but it was overshadowed by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I'll leave, she said, her voice hoarse. I'll take your father and Anna, and we'll go somewhere else. We'll leave you alone. Just give us enough to start over. That's all I'm asking. I studied her face, looking for the lie, the hidden trap. But I didn't see it. I just saw a broken woman who had finally realized she'd lost. Fine, I said. I'll give you a settlement. Enough to buy a small house in a quiet town and live modestly for the rest of your lives. But there are reconditions. You never contact me again. You never speak to the press about me. You never mention my name. You disappear from my life as thoroughly as I've disappeared from yours. She nodded, a single jerky motion. I understand. Sign the agreement, Arthur said, pushing a stack of papers across the table. And it's done. My mother signed with a trembling hand. She didn't meet my eyes. She didn't say goodbye. She just walked out of the office, a ghost of the woman she used to be. I sat in the empty room, the silence pressing in on me. I had won. I had finally, completely and utterly won. The $10 million RS I'd sacrificed everything for. It was a rounding error now. I was worth 100 times that. I had an empire, a reputation, a future. I had everything I'd ever wanted. And I felt nothing. That I drove back to my apartment in Brooklyn. The city was beautiful that night, a sea of glittering lights. But I didn't see the beauty. I saw a stage. A stage where I had played the role of the ruthless, triumphant heroine. And I was tired of the performance. That I walked into my apartment, the cold, minimalistic space that had been my sanctuary for so long. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the lights of the city twinkle below me. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from S.A. Ra. She was congratulating me on the settlement. I ignored it. I thought about the old Luna, the woman who had woken up in that grimy apartment. Her heart full of rage and sorrow. I had been so sure that revenge would set me free, that the money, the power, the victory, would fill the void inside me. But the void was still there. It had just gotten quieter. That maybe the point of the second chance wasn't to win. Maybe it was to realize that there was never a game to play in the first place. The real victory wasn't in cutting my family out of my life. It was in learning to live without their approval, their validation, their love. It was in accepting that the only person I needed to answer to was myself. I finished my wine and set the glass down. The city sparkled below me, indifferent and beautiful. I was alone. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lonely. The next morning, I woke up to a new day. The sun was rising over the skyline, painting the clouds in shades of gold and pink. I took a deep breath, letting the cool morning air fill my lungs. The anger was gone. The emptiness was still there. But it was no longer a void. It was a space. A space I could fill with new things, new people, new dreams. I had been reborn once. And now, for the first time, I felt like I was actually living. That I opened my laptop and root typing. It was a resignation letter. Not from Nexus Dynamics, not from my empire. But from the WAR. from the anger, from the past. I was finally truly ready to move on. And as I hit send, I felt a small quiet smile spread across my face. It wasn't the cold, calculating smile of a woman on the war path. It was something gentler, something real. The smile of a woman who had finally, after all this time, found her own way home.